Good morning and welcome to this special Faith Nation coverage of Pastor Andrew Brunson. He's the American pastor who's been imprisoned in Turkey for 18 months on charges that seem to have been made up out of thin air. Yesterday, he finally had his day in court where he told the judge he's never done anything against Turkey. Rather, he says he loves Turkey and has been praying for the nation for 25 years. In a disturbing move after the hearing, Brunson was returned to an even worse prison where he's awaiting a new court date next month. For some answers in this bizarre case and perspective on what's going on inside Turkey, I'm happy to be joined by Aykan Erdemir. He is a former member of Turkey's parliament and currently a senior fellow here in Washington at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And interestingly for our audience, a Muslim who has dedicated his life to advancing religious liberty for all faiths in Turkey. And we thank you for your good work. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Well, let's start with the latest. Pastor Brunson had his big day in court yesterday. It has a new court date has been set for May 7th. Give us a sense of what happened inside the courtroom yesterday.
Now, it was quite an historical hearing. It lasted 12 hours, which is very unusual. It started at 9:30 a.m. and the verdict, the interim verdict, came at 10 p.m. at night. To be frank, I'm sure Pastor Brunson's attorneys are glad that they made it this far, because we have to remember that Pastor Brunson has been in jail for 18 months now, and only last month his attorneys were provided the indictment. So he has been in pretrial detention without an indictment. So at least now he knows formally what he's charged with.
Right.
And so yesterday's court hearing was basically Pastor Brunson in Turkish trying to defend himself against the ludicrous accusations in a 62-page mumbled indictment.
Right. So you say he received that indictment a month ago, but actually the news media leaked it before he actually knew what he was being charged with and before he could talk to his attorney about this. Give us a sense of some of these strange charges in this 62-page indictment.
Yes. So in mid-March, finally Pastor Brunson had access to his indictment, but it was a week after Turkey's pro-government media got a leaked copy and started smearing him and condemning him in Turkish public eye. So we have to first start from there, meaning Pastor Brunson has no opportunity of a free and fair trial in Turkey. He is already smeared and condemned in Turkey's pro-government media. He has no attorney-client privilege. He had basically no time to prepare for this hearing. And when we take a deeper look into the 62-page document, it really is an embarrassing document, not only for the Turkish legal system, but for the Turkish Republic itself. It is an incoherent copy and paste accusations. I did my best to find a single concrete evidence of any wrongdoing, and there is none whatsoever. Oh. And just to give you how crazy it is, one of the evidence against him is a video of a kind of a cooking show, like a certain dish which they associated with a terrorist group. Another piece of evidence is a text message to him by a colleague of his who tells him, "I'm sorry, I have diarrhea, I won't be able to make it to church." Another piece of evidence is how he's conspiring with groups that has nothing to do with his own church. So yesterday, at the beginning of the court, he was trying to lecture the judge and the prosecutors about the differences between, evangelical Christians and Catholics and Latter-day Saints, because in the indictment, all and every religious organization associated with the U.S. Has been lumped into one.
Okay. Wow. And also, you were saying that he's accused of being a part of two different terrorist organizations in Turkey that actually hate one another, right?
Exactly.
At the same time.
Exactly. For example, at this point, the indictment claims that Pastor Brunson, earlier they used to claim that he was a member and even a leader of two terrorist organizations. Now I think they're toning down. So they these days argue that he worked for two terrorist organizations. One is Turkey's kind of Marxist-Leninist pro-Kurdish PKK, and the other one is an Islamic network, the Gülen Network, which has been classified as a terrorist organization in Turkey. And just to remind our audience, these two organizations are kind of arch rivals. They come from very different ends of the political spectrum. They have been struggling against one another, and Pastor Brunson miraculously managed to, according to the prosecutors, work for both of these organizations while at the same time being a CIA official and involved in military espionage in Turkey. It's all basically science fiction.
Right, you can't make this up.
No.
Well, also in the indictment, he is accused of terrorism by way of trying to spread the gospel as a Christian pastor. Is this a new idea in Turkey that someone could be guilty of terrorism for practicing or trying to spread the gospel message?
Now, when we take a look at recent Turkish history, there has always been some skepticism about missionary work and attempts to criminalize it. But I think it's only in the aftermath of the coup we begin to see missionary work together with terrorism. That is, by the way, let's be very clear, according to the Turkish Criminal Code, missionary work is not a crime and it is not terrorism. So in accusing Pastor Brunson's work by referring to it as Christianization, I would argue that the prosecutors are inventing a crime that's not part of the Turkish code. So in a way, Pastor Brunson has been charged with crimes that do not exist in the Turkish criminal code. Oh. And these charges would be against not only the Turkish constitution, which still is secular, which is still about separation of mosque and state, church and state, but also against Turkey's international law obligations, because Turkey is a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights, which enforces an even more stricter understanding of religious freedoms and liberties. So in a way, this is really an embarrassing document, an embarrassing set of accusations for Turkey, not for Pastor Brunson.
You brought up the fact that Pastor Brunson was imprisoned for 17 months before any charges were levied against him. Here in America, we have a right to a speedy trial. And so I wonder if you can give us a sense of what Pastor Brunson may be facing in terms of Turkey's judicial system. I mean, he has another hearing on May 7th. Will that be resolution for him? How long could this go on before we find out if he is convicted of these crimes or not?
Now, again, for our American audiences, this is really a Kafkaesque trial because in Turkey there's no jury system. We don't have the understanding of consecutive hearings of a case. So each hearing of a trial could be 3 months, 6 months apart. Cases can last many years. For example, under Turkey's state of emergency, since the abortive coup of July 2016, now suspects can be held in prison in pre-trial detention for up to 7 years without a conviction. So in the case of Pastor Brunson, we might be looking to 7 years of pre-trial detention followed by 35 years of prison sentence, which is what the prosecutors are asking now. But we have to remember that only a few months ago, the prosecution leaked to the pro-government press that they were actually going to charge for 3 consecutive life sentences, which then came down to a life sentence. But in the recent indictment, we see that they have dropped the charges of attempting to overthrow the government, in another outrageous charge. Right. So at least now they're only considering 35 years, but in practically, that would also amount to a life sentence.
Sure. Now, you, in the Washington Post, you wrote an opinion piece this week in which you revealed that, we've been talking about the pro-government media in Turkey and how they are misconstruing this case. They actually have said that if Pastor Brunson had been successful in his attempts to help people overthrow the government in 2016, that he would have become America's next CIA director. correct? That's what the media is telling the Turkish people about this.
Exactly, and that's only one of the numerous ludicrous accusations against him. The same pro-government media, for example, also argue that Pastor Brunson knew about the coup in 2010, and he was even providing special forces equipment to certain Turkish citizens in preparation for the coup to come in 6 years. Now, let's just do the math here. You know, this goes all the way back to 2010. So they're arguing that together with the Gülen network, which Turkey sees as a terrorist organization, Pastor Brunson knew about the coup 6 years ago. Now, in 2010, Fethullah Gülen, the head of the Gülen network, was the closest ally of Erdogan, working together to defeat Turkey's pro-secular forces in a referendum. So now the prosecution has leaked to the press that Pastor Brunson, back in 2010, in collusion with the Gülen network, were planning a coup to come in 2016. So it doesn't even add up, meaning they haven't given these ludicrous accusations a second read. They haven't checked whether there is any internal consistency. So these are the kinds of crazy allegations, which are in fact, at one level, impossible to refute at a rational level. Meaning, in any self-respecting, I think, court would have refused to entertain such accusations, especially almost all of them rest on testimonies from 3 secret witnesses. Now, that's also, you know, a Kafkaesque dimension. You know, you don't see that in the American legal system. So Pastor Brunson has very little opportunity to, first of all, question who these witnesses are, to have a serious cross-examination. For example, the only way in which these secret witnesses can testify and can be cross-examined to a bit is they sit at a separate courtroom elsewhere, and through a video conference, you can't see their faces, their voices might be altered, and the only thing we know from the indictment is, I gave it a very close read, you know, the statements these secret witnesses made to the prosecutors, what I can tell you is, it's clear that either these people are psychologically disturbed, or they have been paid to smear Pastor Brunson. It's really a set of, again, crazy accusations. Normally, you know, if you read that statement from a so-called witness, I think that would discredit the witness right away. For example, there is one witness who is not a secret witness who argues, I have killed someone, went in prison, left on parole, broke my parole conditions, went back in prison again. So he's listing all the crimes he has committed, and then he's accusing Pastor Brunson of crime. So this is where we are right now.
Not a credible witness at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, which brings me to my next point, that this is actually, Pastor Brunson is a hostage, if you will. So if you could, I know this story goes very deep, but in terms of why President Erdogan of Turkey is so bent on having him, keeping him until he can get what he wants from the U.S. Tell us about that.
Now, we have to remember that there are more than 35 Western nationals, including Pastor Brunson, including 3 U.S. consular workers imprisoned in Turkey. Now, some of them have been released, some of them are still in prison. This is what I call a revolving door policy of hostage diplomacy. These Western nationals, including Pastor Brunson, are Turkish President Erdogan's pawns to be traded, to be used as leverage against the US, against European Union countries. And it's really a shameless attempt holding individuals hostage, a tactic borrowed from Iran and North Korea. And I would argue it's not only a crime in international law sense, but it's also a crime according to the Turkish laws themselves. And with all my heart, I hope that in the near future we will see that all those individuals framing and victimizing Pastor Brunson, will they themselves end up in courts for what they have done.
Well, we will see, and we will be following this story very closely. Icon, we thank you so much for your work on this and for giving us some insight into what's going on in Turkey. And I know that our viewers will continue to be praying for Pastor Brunson. Thank you so much for joining us.